our webinar tonight is Build Your Own Dashboard. I'm Phil Satloff, hosting, and our Power BI developer who's going to be leading the actual building is Shannon Lindsey. A quick review of our agenda tonight here. The second bullet down, again, getting the data. You will need the files that we either emailed out the links or the links are in the chat. So if you need the data, please go ahead and get the data ready now. And I will say, if you have two screens, it'll be a good idea to use two screens. If you don't, you can follow along for sure, but it'll be easier if you have two screens. Okay, so a little bit about Blue Raster. Blue Raster is a consulting company based right outside of Washington, D.C. in Virginia. We're specialists in GIS, web application development, and business intelligence. We've been around for about 20 years now, and we're a Microsoft partner, an Esri partner, and we've been fortunate enough to actually be awarded several awards from Esri. These are a few of the clients that organizations we've been working with just in Power BI. Several state health departments. We've helped them with COVID dashboards and other solutions. The Red Cross, Columbia University's School of Public Health, even Microsoft. And a little bit about us. So again, I'm Phil Satloff. I'm a program manager at Blue Raster. I've been here for 7 years. I have a GIS background, but I am super excited about Power BI. Shannon, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Shannon Lindsey. I work at Blue Raster on Power BI and also kind of more broadly health informatics. And I'm going to be taking you through the demos today. So Phil, thank you so much for kicking this off. I really just want to say to everyone, thank you so much for spending your evening, afternoon, morning, whatever time it is. But thank you so much for spending your time with us. We know how valuable it is. And let's just go ahead and get started. I do see some familiar faces on the line. I know there are a few folks who joined our last webinar, and I encourage everyone to join our upcoming webinars. But some of this may be a bit of review before we get into the content itself, so just bear with us. Also, if you want to take yourself off mute and ask a question, you're welcome to. This is a small enough group that we can chat freely, so feel free to ask any questions that you may have. So with that being said, let's jump in. First thing that we want to just talk about is, what are we talking about today? What is Power BI? You know, oftentimes BI, business intelligence, it's a buzzword, it's thrown around a lot, and it means different things to different people. So is there anyone that wants to mention, either in the chat or bring yourself off mute, what is BI to you?
The ability to integrate several databases to analyze the information.
Perfect. Thanks, Marissa. Great. So analyze information and make decisions based on that data, right? So that's fantastic. To me, BI is all about data use and making sure that the data is available to decision makers when they need it. So we talk about having the right data in the right place and at the right time. So the goal of Power BI is to make sure that everyone has access to information to make decisions, not just the small proportion of the team that actually has access to the data or that has access to the analytics itself. Power BI is a set of techniques and tools that allow you to transform raw data into meaningful information. So like Marissa mentioned, it allows you to connect to multiple data sources at one time. It then allows you to transform and visualize your data. You can share insights across your organization and between organizations. Then, of course, you can embed those into your own application or website. And finally, and the real key to all of this is that you are bringing your data to life. You're allowing people who would not traditionally have access to data or who would not traditionally be able to rapidly interpret that data, you're putting that at people's fingertips, and that's what we're going to do today. So just very quickly, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to build. So if you guys want to start making, opening up Power BI desktop and making sure you know where those files are, that would be great. What we're going to do today is we are going to build in Power BI desktop. And what we're going to do is we're going to build a Power BI report. We are then going to publish that Power BI report up to the service. And in the service, I'm going to show you how you can take a report or multiple reports and build them into what is called in Power BI a dashboard. Now, in Power BI, dashboards and reports can be interchangeable. So essentially what we're doing is we are building a report. So we're connecting to data, we're building a report, we're publishing it up to be consumed by our end users. And from there, we have the option to either present a report or to present a dashboard. So a dashboard is really your high level view. Think about like a dashboard on a car, right? It's a high level view of what's going on. And then if you, like as an executive, you want to drill down into that data, you can click on a tile that potentially takes you into a report. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And let's jump in. Thing, again, I know I've mentioned this like 5 times, but you're not going to be able to follow along unless you have Power BI on your machine. So go ahead and download Power BI from the Microsoft Store. If you don't have access to the Microsoft Store, you can also download Power BI from the web. The difference between the two downloads is that the Power BI application that you download from the Microsoft Store automatically updates on a monthly basis. Power BI Desktop as a product is updated monthly, which can be difficult to keep up with, but is also very exciting because they're taking our feedback and they're incorporating it. So if you have Power BI that you download straight from the web, and maybe that's because your IT department doesn't allow you to use the Microsoft Store, or it's a preference, that's completely fine. You will just have to manually update that. So a little bit now about the data that we're going to use. The data that we're going to use today actually comes from something that I thought was really interesting. It caught my eye, and I know that we all may be a little bit saturated with COVID data, but I saw a news report the other day about a teacher who created a national database. She wanted to know where COVID was occurring in schools so that teachers and students could remain safe and track school openings. So I went through the website, I navigated to her Google Sheet, and what she did here was she built this really neat tracker. And within the tracker, you can go in and you can pull down data for different states. So in this case, what I did was I pulled down data for 3 states, and you should all see in the folder that you have data 3 Excel sheets that are identical in structure. So what we're going to do now is we're going to open up Power BI Desktop and we're going to get started with our build. So I want to do this all from scratch so that we're all on the same page here. So everyone go ahead and open up Power BI Desktop on your machine, and it does take a moment to load. And once you have Power BI Desktop open, you're going to see this big, obnoxious yellow box, which actually looks even bigger in this release. But what you'll see in this box here is we have different tutorials that you're able to access, and these are from Microsoft Learn, so they're really good. I would recommend them if you're looking to get started. You also will see that you have the opportunity to get data, which is what we're going to do here today, and you can access other reports that you previously have seen. So let's go ahead and get some data. So I want everybody to go ahead and click on Get Data. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to keep us all together on the same page. So if you are falling behind or you need me to repeat something, please feel free to ask. There is no shame in that. I want to make sure that everyone is able to build. So what you should be able to see now is we are going to connect to some data. Now, there are so many different options that you can connect to in Power BI. I really feel like Power BI can connect to just about anything. And if you are not able to connect, if there's no native connector to the data source that you're interested in, you can actually work with a developer to build a custom connector. So you really can get data from just about anywhere. One other just quick note is that Power BI is not in and of itself a database. It can perform some of the traditional extract, transform, and load functions that a database does perform, and it has its own in-memory storage with something called the Vertipack engine. However, Power BI is not a database. We're connecting to our data. So for the purposes of today, we are going to get data from a folder. So go ahead and click on this folder and click connect. And what we're going to do is we are then going to navigate to the folder that contains the demo files. Now, I personally am not a huge fan of the interface here for getting to my data, so I always just copy in the folder path. You're welcome to do whatever it is that you want to get to those files. Go ahead and get to those files and click OK. Now, what you're going to see, it may take people a minute to get there, but what you're going to see when you click OK is you're going to see a preview window of the contents of the folder that you just connected to. So if you connected to a folder that has 100 different CSV files, for example, you're going to see a preview of those CSV files listed, and then we get some associated metadata with them that can actually be really helpful. And what we're going to do here is we're going to take data from these 3 Excel files, and we are going to put it all into one table so that we can analyze these 3 states all together. This is also a really super helpful feature that I love in Power Query that can also be done in Excel. So if a part of your routine job duties are you have to collate data from a bunch of different files. Maybe they're spit out of some sort of structured system, and you have to do this on a monthly basis. Power Query and Power BI is the tool for you. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's inside of these files. We're actually going to combine them. We're going to take a look at them. We're going to do a little bit of cleanup, and then we're going to load them to the model. So I want everyone to go ahead and click on Transform Data here. Now, Power BI tries to trick us. They want you to click on Combine, but do not do that. Click on Transform Data, and we are going to open up what is called the Power Query Editor. Okay, is everybody with me? Can I get a thumbs up or something in the chat? Are we all together? All right, Phil is with me. That's good. I see a hand. I'm assuming that's a thumbs up. I like that. We've got one person who's still catching up. So Sadhana, while you are grabbing those files, I'm going to give you guys just a quick preview of what's going on here in the query editor. So first things first, what you see here is, again, what we saw in the preview. So we've got our Florida data, our Georgia data, our Texas data. These 3 files are all here. The first thing I'd like to mention is that your Power Query Editor might look slightly different from mine right now to begin with, and I'd like to change that. I want all of our query editors to look the same. So do this with me. Let's go to the View tab of the ribbon in Power Query, and I want you to turn on the formula bar, the column quality, and the column distribution. Turn those on by just doing a little tick in the boxes. While everyone is turning that on, I'm going to mention what those things are. So the formula bar here shows you what the M code is that's being written behind the scenes. So when you hear M, when we're talking about Power BI, it's actually referring to something that's called the mashup language, and that is how Power Query makes transformations to your data. So it's a good practice to keep that formula bar on just so that you can see what's going on behind the scenes. If this does not appeal to you, you can ignore it. This is just something that I personally like to do. The second 2 little things that we toggled on here, column distribution and column quality. will help us to understand what's going on with our data. So here you can see we've got a little green, pink, and gray bars that tell us what's the proportion of valid cells, how many cells are erroneous, and how many are empty. And then you also are able to see the kinds of values that you have in your data set. So when you are doing exploratory analysis, it's the first time you've ever looked at your data, this is really super helpful. There's also some inbuilt column profiling. We're not going to get to that today, but that is something that you can use and also export. So this is a really powerful tool. Alrighty, it looks like we've got more people that have their files loaded in the query editor. Let's proceed. Are we good? Okay. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to take the data from each of these 3 files. So you can see here as I click through the cells in the Power Query Editor, I get a preview of what's going on, okay? So I want to take the data that is inside of each of these 3 files and I want to see it because I want to use it. I want everybody to do this with me, okay? Go ahead and click on the 2 little down arrows in the content column. So it's the first column, click on the 2 little down arrows. That's the technical term, of course, 2 little down arrows to combine the files. And what you're going to get here is you're going to see it takes a minute, but Power Query is thinking, and you're going to get a preview window. And it's going to say, okay, what is it, Shannon, that you're trying to do? Okay, we need to give it some instructions. What we need to do is to say, okay, take for each of these 3 files, take a look at the data tab in the workbook. So what we're looking at here is there are 2 tabs in each of these files, and you can see that if you open up those Excel files, okay? There are 2 tabs in the file. One is a tab called Comments, and in the Florida file, it looks like that tab is empty, which is fine. Another is the tab called Data. We are interested in the data. That's what we want to build with. So go ahead and select Data and click OK. And it's going to take a moment to load. And then there is some serious wizardry that's about to happen behind the scenes that I'm going to talk about quickly. But before I do, as everyone is getting their files combined, this to me is like super magical. We just took data from 3 Excel files with, I don't know, 4 clicks of a button maybe. We combined them all into one, and check this out. Okay, you can now see here that in the source column, I have all 3 of my files. If there were more than 3 files in that folder, I would see the row level data for each of those files. So that's pretty sweet, okay? My work here is done, webinar over. No, I'm kidding. Okay, I'm laughing at myself, but you know, that's what you got to do on a webinar. Okay, so we now have the data for all 3 files. We want to take a look at it. When you are working in Power Query, there are a few best practices. The first is to always take a look at your preview, take a look at your data types, make sure that you have everything set up properly. The way that you prepare your data in Power Query is really important because if the data types are not correct, you are not going to be able to build and create calculations using that data. So what I'd like us to do is everybody just take a look around, peruse what's going on in here. You can see here that we've got some errors in some of the columns. That's a little concerning, but we'll get to that. And now, what is all this mess? What's going on here? What have we done? Okay, this is another one of my favorite parts about Power Query. I wonder how many times I can say that in one session, but what Power Query does is that it records every single step that you apply to the data, whether you physically apply that step or whether Power Query does it natively. All of those steps are recorded, and you can then go back and either change them, update them, remove them. Marissa, I see your hand. Do you have a question? Okay, hand down. I'm going to take that as a no. No problem. No problem. Okay, so what's happening here is we've got these steps that are being applied to the query, and now what's this nonsense up here? Okay, we've got some helper queries that have really just been created in order to help us combine these files. And the more you learn about Power BI, the more you will learn about the significance of these and how they work. Essentially, what you do is you apply potentially some data cleaning steps in your sample file in the helper queries. And then those data cleaning steps will be applied to all 3 files before they become combined. So it's really great, magical. I encourage you to explore that more after this webinar. Now, very quickly, one thing that is really important in Power BI is you don't want to bring in every single column in your data source into your data model, because columns take up space in a database. Okay, so we want to keep our model nice and tight and small, because if our model is not small, Power BI will be slow to get the data into the visual from the data model. And what that means is that it's going to take a while for the visuals to respond when an end user clicks on something, and it doesn't make for a nice end user experience. So we want to eliminate the number of columns that we need in the model. We're going to do this together. I'm going to stop talking. Let's go to the home tab of the ribbon. Okay, up here at the top, this is the ribbon that I'm talking about. Everybody go to the home tab of the ribbon. We're going to go to choose columns, and we are going to choose columns. Now, if you are working with a team and they say, you know, we might want to look at this eventually, but we don't want to look at it today, go ahead and leave it out of your model. You can bring it back in with a click of a button. So for the purposes of today, we're going to look at the state, the district, the school, the city, the source date, and then we're going to look at 3 metrics: confirmed students, confirmed staff, and confirmed undefined. So everybody go ahead and get those columns selected. You can click OK. And then I want you to take a look over on the right-hand side of your Power Query Editor to see what steps are applied as you did that. Okay, so again, we want the state, the district, the school, the city, the source date, and then our number of confirmed cases. That is what we're interested in. Okay, when you are ready, go ahead and click OK. And what you'll see here is we now have only 8 columns. Okay, this is more manageable. This is something I can work with. We have 8 columns. I'm going to scroll through and I'm going to take a look. I still have something going on in here. Okay, I can see that I've got some errors in some of these columns, and I want to just scroll through here and see what's going on. Now note, this is just a preview of your data. You are not able to type into these cells, and you cannot write back to your database. So any changes that you make in Power BI here, those changes are local, they're in Power BI, you're not affecting your data model at all. Okay, I want to see physically what are the errors that are going on in here. I'm just going to demonstrate this. You don't need to follow along. But the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to keep rows with errors because I want to do a little investigation. What's going on? What I'm seeing here is that I have an error here where someone used an incorrect date format. Excel is not a database, okay? In this case, we did the best that we could and we were collecting data rapidly from all over the world. This is not a criticism, sorry, all over the country. This is not a criticism of the way that this database was created, but just generally speaking, we do like to avoid Excel sources just because we have errors like these. But what I can see is these are just not the type of data that are going to work for this analysis. So I'm going to exclude these records. So here's what I would like you all to do with me. Go ahead and select your confirmed students, confirmed staff, and confirmed undefined columns. Select those 3 columns by holding the Control key. And we're going to go up here on the Home tab of the ribbon. There is a Remove Rows option. Go ahead and click the down arrow, and we are going to remove errors. Okay, this is looking a bit better. You can now see I have more data and we are ready to start building. Okay, so for those of you that may have fallen behind or are catching up, here's what we did. We clicked on the magic little double down arrow to combine our files. We selected the columns that we wanted to reduce the size of our model. Okay, and from there, we just removed errors in the fields that had errors in them. So that's it. That's all we've done. So we've applied a few steps, and now what we need to do is we are bored with looking at Power Query Editor. We want to build something. So let's go ahead and close the Power Query Editor, which is going to load the data to the model so that we can then build with it. So everybody go ahead and click Close and Apply, and you're going to see that this Power Query Editor window goes away or minimizes. It's going to take a moment to create a connection and load the data to the model, and then we're going to be able to build with it. And what you're going to see now is something interesting. So over here on the right-hand side, you're going to see these fields appear, and these should look familiar to us, right? These are the fields that we were just working with. Okay, so I'm going to jump back into the slide deck for just a moment. Hopefully people are still with me. All right, so we now have taken data from 3 different files. We've combined it with just a few clicks of a button. I hope that everyone was able to do that. The next thing that we need to do is we need to apply some calculations to our data so that we are able to visualize it. Oftentimes when you're visualizing data, particularly health data, we're not able to, raw numbers aren't going to tell us anything. So we might need to see, what proportion of all the cases are teachers? What proportion of all the reported cases are students? Or maybe what proportion of everybody who tested is positive? We don't have that data in this case, but those are just some examples of what we might want to do. So before you can build visuals in Power BI, the first thing you have to do is to load and clean your data. One thing to mention about those data cleaning steps, and this is the real magic behind this tool, is that if you refresh your data and you load in new data, so let's say you had data for September, and now we need to bring in our October data. So you click refresh, all of those same data cleaning steps are going to be applied to your new data. So it's like your data is going through this assembly line and you've defined the steps that need to be applied, and then those are going to be applied systematically again and again and again. So it's a little bit more fail-proof than Excel because we're not applying a formula to a cell. We are systematically applying those steps to the different columns of the data. Okay, the next thing we're going to want to do is to explore our data, which we've started doing. We're going to assign some data types, particularly to our location data, and then we're going to create any calculations that we need in DAX. So let's jump back in to Power BI, and we're going to get started. The first thing I want to mention in Power BI, so we're now looking at the front end of Power BI. This is where you build. Okay, this is your canvas. This is how you work with the data. And remember, this data has already been cleansed and loaded to the model. When you put a visual on this page, okay, what's happening behind the scenes is that visual is then querying your data model, okay, and pulling back that data into the visual. You don't need to get that deep. All we need to know is that it works. So the first thing I want to show everyone is go ahead and grab a field from your data model, any field, pick a field, any field, and drag it onto the canvas. Okay, congratulations. You've just built your first Power BI visual, or for many of you, maybe it's not your first. But what happens here is that when you drag your data onto the canvas, you're going to get the default visualization depending on the data type. So I dragged the confirmed cases that are of undefined type onto my canvas. Power BI knows that this is a number, okay, and so it's summarizing that number. The default visual for that is, a bar chart, okay? So that's what I've got here. Very quickly, let's do just a quick tour of the front end here of Power BI. Over here on the right-hand panel, you see your report view. That's what we're working in right now, okay? The next thing that is really important when you're exploring your data and assigning your different data types is this data tab. When you're working in the data tab, what you're going to see is a preview of all of the data that you've already cleaned up and has been loaded to the model. This is what you have to build your visualizations off of. Okay, so here you can see that we have 1,314 rows of data that we are all working with that came from those 3 separate Excel files. Okay, now if we wanted to connect this Power BI report also to a web API to pull in some additional data and also to a SQL database, we could do that. Okay, but for the purposes of today, we've got our 3 Excel sheets. They're all in one place and they're all right here in one query where you can see them. Finally, in the front end of Power BI, you have this model view where you're able to see the relationships between the different queries in your report. So if you are pulling data from multiple sources, what you'll see is each of those is going to be loaded into the model in a separate query. And this is where you really have some serious, I don't want to use the word power because that's just doesn't work, but this is where this product really shines. So if you are pulling in data from multiple sources, this is where you're going to be able to connect those different data tables using a primary key. So this becomes like a dimensional database. We'll talk about that in a subsequent webinar. But let's go ahead, everybody jump back to the report tab and let's do a little bit of building. So the first thing that I'd like everybody to do is let's just plot on a bar chart the number of cases. Okay, so everybody from the visualizations pane, what you're going to do here is you're going to grab a clustered column chart if you don't already have one, okay? And let's drop into that our 3 numbers. So we've got our confirmed staff, confirmed students, and confirmed undefined. Just a quick note, all of these panels, and you will notice there are many, okay? All of these panels can be moved, minimized, maximized in order to see what your fields are. One other just quick tip is if you are working in your visualizations pane, this becomes like a scroll bar within a scroll bar within a scroll bar, and it can be really tricky. So just know in the visualizations pane, particularly if you're looking at formatting, there's a lot of scrolling happening, okay? There is a lot you can do in the front end of Power BI and it's all nested in there. So just make sure you fully explore around. You can scroll, you can minimize, maximize, do what you need with your panes. Okay, so now we should all have a visual and we can see here, this is nothing special. It's a bar chart. Now it was pretty easy to build. It was just 3 clicks of a button, but we've got the number of confirmed COVID cases. We've got staff, we've got students, and we've got undefined. Okay, now is this business intelligence? Is this telling us anything? Can we make a decision based on this data? Not quite. Okay, we've got a little bit of work to do. Now remember the fields that we have in this data source, right? So here we've got the state where the cases occurred. We've got the school itself. In some cases, we have the city. We've got the date that the case occurred. Okay, and then we've got the total number of cases. So if I wanted to make this into something actionable, maybe, you know, schools that need an intervention because they have a high number of reported cases and maybe we need to ensure that they're quarantining, or maybe we need to ensure that that district takes action. We need to be able to see this data over time. We need to be able to see it by location. Okay, and we need to see, you know, like what's the total number of cases and what proportion of that are, you know, students versus staff. So let's take this one step further. Okay, are you guys ready to write your first line of DAX syntax? Okay, now for those of you that have no idea what DAX syntax is, you are just about to know. DAX is the data analysis expression language. It is used in the front end of Power BI, and it is a really powerful tool to systematically build calculations over your data. There are 3 different ways to use DAX. You can use DAX in a calculated measure, in a calculated column, and in a calculated table. For the purposes of today, we are going to create a calculated measure that is always the path of least resistance. So we're all going to do that together right now. Okay, you may notice that DAX is going to look somewhat similar to Excel formulas. So this may look familiar to you, which is what I think makes it fairly easy to comprehend, especially when you first start learning. So what we're going to do is everyone on the home tab of the ribbon, go ahead and click on New Measure. When you click on New Measure, you are going to see this formula bar appear. And what you will see here is that the word measure appears followed by an equal sign. Let's go ahead and rename this measure. And let's call this confirmed cases, because I want to look at the total number of confirmed cases, okay, with all three of these categories combined. So here's what I'm going to do. Now you guys can write your whole formula on one line. I'm just splitting this up for the purposes of demonstration, so it's big enough to see. So I'd like everyone to start typing the word sum. What you're going to see here is we are able to sum any one of the columns in our data model. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to see here in, what is that, single quotes is demo files. So that's the name of our query. And I have a typo in there, which really bothers me. But what we want to do here is we want to sum the number of staff the number of students, and I'm just going to start typing students. Okay, we have the lead ahead text and something that's called IntelliSense, which will help us figure out what it is that we're going to try to do. So I'm going to add the number of staff, the number of students, and the number of undefined cases. Okay, now before I close out of here, what I want to point out is that we are adding the total from the staff column, the total from the students column, and the total from the undefined column. We are aggregating over columns, which may be a little bit interesting to wrap your head around because that's not how Excel works, but just trust me. Blessing, yes, I did push Shift plus Enter to put my data on a new, to put my formula on a new row. You do not have to do that. I just did that so that it's really clear how you guys can see what's going on here. But if I were to minimize this by doing this, I'm going to just remove these so that you can see what it would look like on one line. That is also completely fine. Jenna, thank you so much for your help. All right, so now we've got our first measure. You have all written DAX. Give yourselves a round of applause. You're great at DAX. We're going to push enter, or we're going to click the little green check mark next to our measure. And now this is pretty cool. So you can see over here that we now have a measure. It has a little calculator by it, and that's going to give us our total number of cases. So what I'd like us all to do is to go ahead and plot this on the canvas by just clicking on confirmed cases. And it is a number. It is going to give us a bar chart as the default visualization. I'd like everybody to go ahead and display this as a card visual. So go ahead and take your card, and with the little gray handles around the visual, select your card visual. Now, something that can be a little bit tricky about Power BI is if you don't click in the white space before you click on something else, you might accidentally change something that you didn't want to change. So just hot tip, make sure you click in the white space before you add a new visual. Otherwise, you're going to add everything to the same visual. Okay, so I am going to jump back into the presentation. While I'm doing that, I would recommend that everyone save this file so that you have a copy of it. Power BI does auto save, but we haven't even titled this yet. So save your file. And I'm going to jump back into the deck. Okay, very, very quickly. We've talked about M and we've talked about DAX. Okay, these are both languages that, yes, you will learn as you work through Power BI, but they are not languages that you need to know everything right off the bat to get started. Okay, Power Query, this is your M, this is your mashup language. This is what happens behind the scenes for that transformation of your data before you start building. Okay, now Power Query, the way that's driven is just by clicking around in the interface. Okay, you can also write your own custom M code, but when you are learning, you're going to click around, you're going to right click to remove a column, you're going to do a find and replace. You're going to do, you know, just various things that are inbuilt into the interface by pointing and clicking. Okay, on the front end, we've got our DAX, that's our data analysis expression language. And I've got some great resources to that. We're going to share some resources later on in the presentation. But for the purposes of today, you've already written a DAX formula. So every single one of you can do it. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about is sharing. But before we do that, let's jump back into our Power BI report. Does anyone, it's been a really quiet room. I've been doing a lot of talking. Phil, have there been any questions in the chat that I've missed? Is there anyone that wants to ask a question?
Looks like we're caught up right now.
Okay. Fortunately, we've got some experts in the audience as well. Yes, Derek, I'm going to go ahead and show that measure to you guys one more time. So in order to display the measure, so let's say that you've already made your measure and you made a mistake and you didn't do it the way you thought you wanted, or the figure itself looks wrong and you're like, that is not correct. Okay, the way to display the measure is to click in the middle of the measure over here on the right-hand side. And then you'll see your measure in the formula bar here. And I am making mine bigger by just pushing the control button and scrolling up on my mouse. That's another just little hot tip if you need to make your DAX bigger. I'm like half blind, so I like to make it bigger so that I can see. Okay, so here again, let's talk about what we're doing. We're taking the sum of all the staff, we're adding it to the sum of all the students, and we're adding that to the sum of all of the undefined. So we're going to be able to look at our data and slice and dice it based on the total number of cases. We'll also be able to look at those different categories, but I am interested in the total number of cases by location. All right, so let's move on. I just said the word location, and we are a mapping organization after all. So let's drop some maps onto here. Let's use a time slicer and let's build something that's actually useful. Real quick for Martin, I'm going to hover over the columns in the column chart. And Martin, these are actually, we may want to change these and I'll show you why. But for now, what I've got in here is my staff, students, and undefined. And it's just the implicit measure. So this is a sum, but this is a sum that's being calculated behind the scenes by DAX. And all we had to do to get there was just to drop that onto the field. Okay, perfect. All right, so let's go ahead and let's make this make sense. First things first, I want to look at this over time. Okay, I need to know, when did cases start increasing? That's what's really going to help me. Okay, so here is what we're going to do. We are going to add a slicer to the page. The first thing I want everybody to do is on your visualizations page, go ahead and grab a slicer. And you're going to see that it drops this slicer visual here. And it does have a little bit of instructions in there. That's brand new, but it's saying select or drag fields to populate this visual. I want to slice and dice by time. Okay, take a look at my date column. Power BI is smart. It recognized this as a date and it automatically builds some time intelligence in behind the scenes. Power BI is great with dates. Dates can be one of the biggest headaches in Excel, although it's getting easier. But go ahead and use this inbuilt time functionality. And I'm just going to go ahead and drop this source date into my slicer. Okay, now what you're going to see here is I now have a slicer that goes between the 14th of April, so that must be our first date of data entry, so it must have been some schools shut down. And this goes all the way up to the 12th of October, and that was just the last date of data that was in that database when I checked last night. Okay, so if you move the slider around, you'll see that all of the data adjusts. Okay, now this is rubbish. I cannot tell what's going on in here. It's too small. We need to fix it. Let's do it. Okay, so in the formatting paint roller on the visualization pane, go ahead and click on format, and we are going to make these things bigger because it is just too small for me. Okay, I'm going to scroll down in my date inputs. So here we have our scroll bar within a scroll bar. Going to make these dates bigger. And you can see, okay, that looks a little bit better. I can actually read what's going on in there. Now, this is also where if you want your slicer to not appear as a time slider, but you want it to appear where you can just tick the little boxes, you are going to do that. See if I can remember where that happens. You're going to do that here in the formatting pane, and you are going to change the type of your slicer. And actually, you're going to do that here. Now, again, this is a little bit small and difficult to see, but if you want to change the type of your slicer, there's a little teeny tiny arrow in the top right-hand corner, and this is where you can select it from a time slider to a drop down to a list. You can make those changes. Okay, for the purposes of today, I'm going to stick with my time slider. That works. Okay, and then we're going to do one final thing. Okay, data viz best practices. In our Western culture, we read from left to right. So you want to put your selection, any selection choices that you're building into your report, you want to put those on the left-hand side. Then you want the most important item that people are looking at somewhere in the middle of your screen. And then you want any other data points to be over a little further on the right-hand side. Anything on the bottom is going to be read last. Okay, so let's go ahead and just shift some things around by just clicking and dragging on them. I'm going to make these things a little bit smaller. I'm going to move my card visual to the right. We're going to add one more slicer, and then we're going to add our map, and then you're going to have your Power BI report. Okay, so the first thing I'd like us to do is to add a slicer for state. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take this state territory agency. I'm just going to click on it. Okay, and what you're going to see here is, whoa, Power BI is crazy. All I did was click on the state. I didn't even assign a special data type to this column. I clicked on a state and it gave me a map. Cool. Okay, I don't really want a map quite yet, so I'm going to change this into a slicer. And what you can see here now, I'm going to make this bigger so that we can all see it, is we've got the different states. Now, I want to be able to drill down a little bit more than state. So let's take this one step further. Let's take this city column and drag that below the state. Okay, now what you can see here is that we are creating a geographic hierarchy. So in your slicer, you have the state. And then if you expand that, deselect here, we can also look at our data by city. That is pretty slick. Okay, now there's one thing that's bothering me about this data, and Phil pointed this out to me earlier. In our data set, we've got some rows that did not have any state assigned. Let's filter those out very quickly. Okay, so everybody, we have not yet used this, but welcome to the filter pane. We are going to use the filter pane to filter out all the blanks from this whole page. Now note, this does affect the number of records that you pull in, so you have to be careful about what you're doing, but for right now, we're going to filter those out. We have only 10 minutes remaining, so we're going to speed this up a little bit. So I'm going to take my state territory agency and I'm going to drag it into the filters on the page. Okay, just drag that across. And from here, I'm going to deselect my blank values. And what you can see here is that we've got 3 rows with blank values. So I'm going to deselect those rows, and then you'll see that the blank values disappear from my slicer. And we are close. The final thing we need to do to this report is to add our map. Oh, I'm not entirely sure what I just did. Okay, so we're going to add our map to the canvas. The first thing that I want us to do is to pick the type of map that we want to work with. And we are we really like working with Esri products at Blue Raster. That is primarily what we do. So let's go ahead and put an Esri map onto the canvas. So our ArcGIS map visual is right down here. This is native. It's built in Power BI. You do not need an additional license to use it. Okay, and what this does is it allows us to add additional layers onto our map that you don't get when you use the out-of-the-box maps in Power BI. So just heads up, this is going to take a moment to load, but the reason it's looking blank is because we have not told this what we want to see in it. So anytime your visualizations are looking funny, take a look at your field wells and see, okay, did I actually tell it what I want? In this case, I want to look at the total number of confirmed cases. And you're going to see it's smart. It drops that into a field well where it thinks is appropriate. Okay, and let's look by state. I'm going to click on state and I'm going to drag it into my field well. And then let's just zhuzh this up a little bit. I'm going to move these around so that they are not burning my eyeballs as badly as my eyeballs are currently being burned. Just clean this up a little bit. And we now have your very first Power BI report. So everybody go ahead and click save. And the next step is going to be to publish this thing. Okay, when you click publish, first of all, it's going to ask you to save. Mine is not saved, so this is going to be a little bit of not helpful. But when you click publish, it's going to ask you where you want to save. Everyone, if you have a Power BI report, you should see that you can save it to your workspace. Okay, so go ahead and publish the report to your workspace. When you publish the report to your workspace, this is where you now can share this with end users. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to take a breath. Everybody just built a Power BI report. Combined data from 3 different Excel files. You made a DAX calculation, you used M, you built a report, and you published that to the service. Okay, that's awesome. Give yourselves a hand. That's great. Okay, when it comes to sharing, you're going to share these reports by publishing them up to the Power BI service. This is a cloud tool. You do not share by emailing around Power BI desktop files. That's not the jam, okay? Publish it to the service. To keep things consistent and automated, you're going to set up some automation in there. And if your organization insists, there is an on-premise option. Licensing is always an option. Okay, you can get started for free. I feel like everyone on the line has their Power BI account. Okay, so you need an Office 365 account to be able to use Power BI. And then the licensing is based on consumption, actually. So if anyone has specific licensing questions, you can feel free to reach out to Phil and I. The final thing I want to do is I want to take this home and just show the difference between a report and a dashboard, because we promised you today that you'd be building a dashboard. Okay, so what I'd like to show you here is this is the report that we just built. And if anyone is interested in rebuilding this, we didn't quite get to the line chart, but we got close enough. You have this Power BI desktop file in that folder that we shared. Okay, so here is your Power BI report. This is what everybody just built. Now, I have actually put this report into a dashboard to show, just the difference between the two. So this is the report that we just built. Okay, but let's say that I am a state health official and I want to see the number of cases in schools, but I also want to see the number of cases in my state overall. So you'll see that by clicking on that, this navigates me, so I'm able to drill down into Power BI report. Okay, if I go back to my dashboard, I can do the same thing by drilling into my COVID cases by state. Okay, so I have just been talking for a complete hour. Phil, do you want to jump back into the deck?
Yes. Okay, so yes, please give. That was very fast. We covered a lot of ground. Any questions that you have, we would really love to hear them, or about any other Power BI or GIS related topics. Send us an email. We do have a telephone that we still use, so go ahead and call us if you feel like it. We have another webinar coming up. Now, everybody's favorite holiday is in November, and of course, I'm talking about GIS Day. That's actually on November 18th, but on November 17th, as a sneak peek, we're going to dive really deeply into the ArcGIS for Power BI visual. We really just scratched the surface of that. There is a wealth of functionality in there, and you can make some really, really interesting maps with that. So please come back for next month's webinar. Here are a few places where you can get more information about us. Shannon also is the head of the Power BI Washington, D.C. user group called the PUG, Power BI User Group. And they also have a monthly meetup, so you can get even more knowledge there. This website, tracerecency.org, that is a project that we've been working on for the past year and a half. There are some ready-to-use templates up there and documentation that can help particularly health workers, but other people as well. So please go there if you want more information. And if you send us an email, we'll be happy to add you to our newsletter, and so you can keep on top of all the developments from Blue Raster. So with that, I want to thank everybody for their time tonight. We will stick around. If you have some questions right now, we'll be happy to answer them. We can talk about what we built tonight if you still have lingering questions or any other topic.